We are grateful for any support, Mr. Davies, Chloe said, her voice even. However, the Haven operates on a philosophy of self-sufficiency. We teach discipline, not dependence. Any partnership must align with those core values. Mr. Davies, a man of simple good intentions, was disarmed by her directness. He tried to explain the scope of Thorne Industries' potential contributions, the sheer financial power behind them. Chloe nodded, but her eyes, keen and analytical, seemed to see beyond the superficial generosity. She probed his answers, asking pointed questions about long-term commitment, about the autonomy of the Haven, about the specific programs Thorne Industries envisioned. Mr. Davies found himself sweating slightly under her calm, intelligent scrutiny. He reported back to Alexander with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. "She is formidable, sir?" Mr. Davies stammered, recounting the meeting. "Very precise. Asked questions no one else ever asks. Not easily impressed by the Thorne name, I'm afraid." A faint smile, devoid of humor, touched Alexander's lips. "Good. That's precisely what I expect. Arrange a follow-up meeting. I will attend this one personally." The announcement sent a ripple of astonishment through Thorne Industries' philanthropic department. Alexander Thorne, personally attending a community center meeting. It was unprecedented. Mr. Davies, though flattered, felt a tremor of trepidation. He knew Alexander's reputation for ruthless efficiency. This was no ordinary philanthropic endeavor. Chloe was preparing for her evening class when Elena, her colleague, burst into the gym, her eyes wide. "Chloe, you won't believe it. Mr. Davies just called. Alexander Thorne, the CEO himself, wants to meet you personally. He's coming to the Haven." Chloe paused, her hands tightening imperceptibly around the boxing gloves she was wrapping. Alexander Thorne, the memory of his startled face, the thud of his body hitting the cobblestones, flashed through her mind. She hadn't expected to encounter him again, much less in her own domain. A sense of unease settled over her. Was this about revenge or something more insidious? "He wants to discuss the partnership details." Elena continued, oblivious to Chloe's internal struggle. "This is huge, Chloe. Think of the funding, the resources we could expand, reach so many more kids." Chloe forced herself to breathe, to push aside the unsettling thoughts. She would meet him. On her turf, she would be professional, polite, but unyielding. She would protect the Haven and her students with the same fierce dedication she had shown in that alley. She owed him nothing, least of all subservience. The day of the meeting, Alexander arrived in a subtly armored black SUV, flanked by two discreetly watchful security personnel. He walked into the Haven, a space filled with the cheerful din of children, the faint scent of liniment and old wood, and a warmth he rarely encountered in his sterile corporate towers. He saw Chloe almost immediately. She was in her activewear, observing a group of teenagers practicing forms, her presence quiet but undeniably commanding. Their eyes met across the bustling gym. Alexander felt a strange jolt, a physical recognition of the woman who had dared to defy him. He detected a flicker of wariness in her hazel eyes, but no fear, no deference, that unwavering defiance, even in the face of his formidable presence, both infuriated and fascinated him further. Chloe approached him, her gait steady, her expression neutral. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming." Her voice was clear, composed, utterly devoid of the awe or nervousness he was accustomed to. She extended a hand, her grip firm and brief. Alexander found himself unconsciously noting the calluses on her palm, the strength in her fingers. "Ms. Vance," Alexander replied, his voice equally controlled, yet with an undercurrent of something he couldn't quite name. "I appreciate you taking the time. I'm keen to understand the Haven's mission firsthand." For the next hour, Chloe gave him a tour of the facility, explaining the various programs, introducing him to students and other instructors. She spoke with passion and conviction, her love for her work evident in every word. Alexander observed her closely, not just listening to her words, but watching her interactions. He saw the genuine affection in the children's eyes when they looked at her, the respect in the teenagers' postures. She was a natural leader, not through intimidation or wealth, but through genuine care and example. He noticed a small scar above her eyebrow, a faint reminder of some past struggle, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered about her own journey. When they finally settled in the small, Spartan office, Alexander launched into his pitch. He spoke of potential investment, state-of-the-art equipment, scholarships, even a new, larger facility in a more prominent location. He painted a picture of grandeur, a future where the Haven, under Thorne Industries' generous patronage, could reach unprecedented heights. He expected her eyes to light up, her resolve to soften, her gratitude to flow. He was offering her the world, or at least a significant piece of his world. Chloe listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When he finished, the silence in the small room stretched, thick and expectant. Alexander waited, anticipating her capitulation. "Mr. Thorne," Chloe finally began, her voice calm, measured. "Your offer is undoubtedly substantial, and on the surface, incredibly generous. However, our values are not for sale. The Haven was built on the sweat and dedication of this community. Our students learn resilience from struggle, not from being handed everything on a silver platter." Alexander felt a familiar irritation prickle at the back of his neck. She was rejecting him. Again. "I assure you, Ms. Vance, our intentions are purely philanthropic. We are not seeking control, merely partnership." His tone hardened slightly. A subtle warning. "Partnership implies mutual respect and shared vision," Chloe countered, her gaze unwavering. "Your vision seems to be about expansion and public relations. Mine is about genuine empowerment, about fostering independent thought and strength. Moving to a more prominent location might sound appealing, but it could alienate the very community we serve. Replacing our well-used, but earned, equipment with state-of-the-art gear could create a sense of entitlement among our students, contradicting the lessons of hard work we strive to instill." Alexander felt a surge of frustration. This woman was impervious to his usual tactics. His charm, his wealth, his power. They bounced off her like water off granite. "So, you would reject a multi-million-dollar investment that could transform your organization?" he asked, his voice now edged with disbelief, bordering on anger. He had never encountered such stubbornness, such utter disregard for what he considered an undeniable opportunity. "I would scrutinize it, Mr. Thorne," Chloe corrected, her posture still perfectly upright. "I would ensure that any investment serves the true needs of our students and our community, not just the public image of Thorne Industries. We are not a photo opportunity. We are a sanctuary, a place of growth. If your intentions are genuine, you will understand that. If they are not, then no amount of money will sway me." Alexander stared at her, a complex swirl of emotions churning within him. Fury, yes, at her insolence, but also a strange or grudging respect for her unwavering integrity. She was not playing a game. She was simply being herself. Her refusal to be bought, to be impressed, to be intimidated, was utterly unprecedented in his experience. He was accustomed to women bending to his will, eager for his favor. Chloe Vance stood before him, unbent, unimpressed, and radiating a quiet power that somehow surpassed his own. He stood up, the chair scraping against the floor, a sharp sound in the small office. Chloe remained seated, her gaze steady. "I see," Alexander said, his voice clipped. "Then perhaps we need to revisit the terms of this partnership. I will have my team prepare a revised proposal, one that addresses your unique concerns." He emphasized unique with a subtle sneer, but the sneer lacked its usual bite. He was no longer confident in his ability to control her. He was merely adapting, a predator changing its hunting strategy. "I look forward to reviewing it, Mr. Thorne," Chloe replied, her tone remaining polite but firm. She watched him leave, her eyes narrowing slightly as he strode past Elena, who looked on with a mixture of excitement and confusion. Chloe knew this wasn't over. Alexander Thorne was not a man who accepted rejection easily, and for some reason, he was undeniably fascinated by her. The feeling was not mutual. To her, he was merely a powerful, arrogant man whose intentions needed careful monitoring. The game, she knew, had only just begun. The encounter at the Haven left Alexander Thorne in a state he rarely experienced genuine frustration, tinged with an unnerving sense of anticipation. Chloe Vance was an enigma, a woman who defied every logical parameter he used to categorize and control the world around him. His usual strategies, honed over decades of ruthless corporate warfare, had proven useless against her unwavering integrity and clear-eyed resolve. She wasn't swayed by money, intimidated by power, or impressed by reputation. She was, in a word, unbuyable, and that made her infinitely more valuable and infinitely more irritating in his eyes. He returned to his office, the meticulously revised proposal for the Haven already taking shape in his mind. He wasn't giving up. The challenge, far from deterring him, ignited a spark of competitive fire he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't about philanthropy anymore. Not truly. It was a game, a test of wills, and Alexander Thorne never lost. He would prove to Chloe Vance that his power extended beyond boardrooms and financial markets, that it could subtly, inextricably, weave itself into the fabric of her righteous world. His next strategy was a multi-pronged assault, professional in veneer but predatory in intent. He would leverage Thorne Industries' vast resources to create a web of attractive, yet subtly controlling opportunities for the Haven. He wanted to embed himself, and by extension, his influence, deep within her operations, to demonstrate the inescapable reach of his empire, and eventually, to prove that her ideals, while admirable, were ultimately naive against the tide of his calculated ambition. First, he ordered his legal team to draft an intricate partnership agreement, one that offered unprecedented funding for the Haven, ostensibly without strings attached. However, buried deep within the convoluted clauses were subtle provisions for Thorne Industries' advisory roles, strategic oversight, and brand integration. These were couched in benevolent language, ensuring long-term sustainability, optimizing operational efficiency, maximizing community impact. But Alexander knew precisely what they meant: control. If Chloe accepted, she would unknowingly cede a piece of her autonomy, allowing Thorne Industries to slowly, inexorably, shape the Haven's future according to his dictates. Simultaneously, Alexander initiated a series of high-profile public relations campaigns, positioning Thorne Industries as the benevolent patron of urban youth development. Press releases were drafted, featuring carefully curated quotes from Mr. Davies, extolling the Haven's virtues and Thorne Industries' commitment. He even commissioned a short, tasteful documentary piece for an online news platform, showcasing the positive impact of community centers, implicitly linking the Haven to his company's progressive image. The goal was to create public pressure, to make it nearly impossible for Chloe to refuse his generosity without appearing ungrateful or obstructive. The revised proposal arrived at the Haven a week later, a thick, bound document delivered by a Thorne Industries courier. Chloe found it on her desk, its glossy cover a stark contrast to the worn papers and well-loved books that usually populated her workspace. She poured herself a cup of lukewarm tea and began to read, her brow furrowing with each page. Elena, peeking into the office, saw the serious expression on Chloe's face. "Is it good news? Are we getting the funding?" she asked, her voice brimming with hope. "It's comprehensive," Chloe replied, not looking up, and very, very carefully worded. Her years of experience dealing with various community grants and small-scale corporate sponsorships had sharpened her eye for hidden agendas. She might not navigate the complexities of corporate finance, but she understood human nature, especially the desire for control masked by benevolence. She spent the next several days meticulously dissecting the agreement, poring over every clause, cross-referencing terminology with online legal dictionaries, and even consulting with a pro bono lawyer who occasionally volunteered for the Haven. What she found confirmed her suspicions. The terms were indeed generous on the surface, promising a future of unprecedented stability for the center. But the embedded clauses, while seemingly innocuous, granted Thorne Industries increasing leverage over curriculum, staffing, and even the future leadership of the Haven. It was a golden cage, beautifully constructed but still a cage. When the follow-up meeting was scheduled, this time at Thorne Industries corporate headquarters, Chloe arrived alone, armed not with a lawyer, but with her own unshakable resolve and a detailed list of amendments. Alexander greeted her in a sleek, minimalist conference room, the city sprawling beneath them like a glittering tapestry. He offered her coffee, water, anything she desired, his demeanor meticulously polite, almost charming. But his eyes, sharp and assessing, never left her. He expected her to be overwhelmed by the opulence, perhaps even intimidated by the sheer scale of his domain. He anticipated a polite, perhaps even nervous, acceptance of his revised offer. He was, as usual, mistaken. Mr. Thorne, Chloe began, her voice calm as she placed her amended document on the polished table. I have reviewed your proposal. It is, as I mentioned, comprehensive. However, there are several points that require significant revision if we are to proceed. Alexander raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his gaze. Revision. Ms. Vance, this proposal was crafted by a team of our top legal and philanthropic minds. It is designed to be mutually beneficial, offering the Haven an unparalleled opportunity for growth. His tone held a subtle edge, a warning that he was not accustomed to having his carefully constructed offers questioned. The opulent interior of the Bentley Mulsanne was usually a sanctuary of calm for Alexander Thorne, CEO of Thorne Industries. Yet, on this sweltering Tuesday afternoon, even the climate-controlled silence and the scent of fine leather could not soothe the agitated hum beneath his skin. Traffic, a serpentine beast of steel and exhaust fumes, had coiled itself around the city's main arteries, bringing his meticulously planned schedule to a grinding halt. His executive assistant, a perpetually flustered young man named Jeremy, was already on the phone, voice a nervous whisper, relaying the exasperated updates from the board members waiting for Alexander's arrival. The quarterly earnings report, a cornerstone of his empire's continued dominance, was slated to begin in 15 minutes. Mutually beneficial, perhaps, from your perspective, Chloe countered, meeting his gaze directly. From ours, it contains provisions that would compromise our core mission and autonomy. For example, Clause 7.3, which grants Thorne Industries advisory rights on curriculum development, is unacceptable. Our martial arts programs are designed to instill self-reliance and critical thinking, not to be influenced by corporate interests. Alexander tapped his fingers impatiently against the polished mahogany trim. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to commanding immediate obedience, scanned the gridlocked vehicles with a predatory glint. Patience was a virtue he neither possessed nor valued, especially when it threatened his authority or his time. He was a man who lived by the clock, a meticulously orchestrated symphony of power plays and calculated risks. Every woman in his life, from his previous partners to his countless employees, had understood the unspoken rule Alexander Thorne was to be respected, admired, and above all, obeyed. The thought of being late, of having to offer an apology or an explanation, was an affection to his very being. Alexander leaned back, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He was enjoying this. She wasn't just rejecting him, she was dissecting his proposal with a surprising level of insight. We merely wish to ensure the highest standards. Ms. Vance, our expertise in strategic planning could undoubtedly benefit your organization. Marcus, he stated, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried an unmistakable command. Find an alternative route. Now. Our standards are already high, Mr. Thorne, Chloe stated, her voice unwavering, and our strategic planning is guided by the needs of our community, not market trends. Similarly, Clause 9.1 regarding brand integration implies that Thorne Industries' logo would be prominently displayed on our materials and even within our facility. The Haven's identity is independent. We are not a marketing opportunity. Marcus, Alexander's long-serving head of security and personal driver, a man of quiet efficiency and unwavering loyalty, glanced in the rearview mirror. His eyes, usually impassive, held a flicker of concern. Sir, the main roads are all choked. The only way to shave off significant time would be through the old district, past the train yards. It is not exactly ideal. Quite unconventional. The conversation evolved into a grueling negotiation, a relentless back and forth that stretched for hours. Alexander, accustomed to subordinates nodding assent, found himself parrying Chloe's precise arguments. Her unwavering defense of the Haven's independence, she challenged every subtle power grab, every attempt to impose his corporate will, with a clarity and conviction that was genuinely impressive. She spoke not of legal jargon, but of values, of the children's well-being, of the integrity of their mission. She wasn't an attorney, but her moral compass was her most potent weapon. Unconventional or not, we are not sitting here like commoners awaiting a public procession, Alexander retorted, a dismissive wave of his hand sweeping away Marcus's hesitation. Move. Time is money, Marcus, and I have neither to waste. He tried to outmaneuver her, to introduce complex financial models or vague corporate jargon, but she simply cut through it with direct questions, demanding concrete explanations. When he attempted to intimidate her with the implied threat of withdrawing his offer, she simply looked at him with an expression of polite indifference. "Then we will continue, as we always have. Mr. Thorne," she would say, her voice calm. "With the support of our community. We have survived without corporate backing for years. We will continue to thrive." Marcus, knowing better than to argue, nodded curtly. With a practiced maneuver, he coaxed the massive vehicle out of the congested lane, expertly navigating a series of tight turns. The smooth, wide boulevards of the financial district rapidly gave way to narrower, grittier streets. Buildings, once gleaming towers of glass and steel, devolved into weathered brick structures adorned with peeling paint and graffiti. The air, previously crisp with air conditioning, thickened with the smell of exhaust fumes, stale rain, and something unidentifiable, metallic. The hum of the city transformed into a cacophony of distant sirens, barking dogs, and the indistinct shouts of street vendors. Her resilience was astonishing. Alexander watched her, a grudging admiration growing within him. She wasn't playing by his rules, and yet she was winning. He had tried to treat her like just another business deal, another entity to be acquired or influenced, but she refused to be categorized. She was a force of nature, untamed and unyielding. The fury he initially felt began to morph into something else, a deep-seated respect for her unshakable principles. Then, Marcus made a sharper turn than usual, veering the Bentley into what appeared to be an abandoned alleyway. The cobblestones beneath the tires were uneven, rattling the luxurious sedan in a way Alexander found profoundly irritating. Shadows clung to the brick walls, and overflowing dumpsters punctuated the oppressive narrowness. It was precisely the kind of place Alexander Thorne, a man who moved in circles of pristine marble and polished glass, never set foot in. Yet, the desperate need for speed, the gnawing anxiety of being late, had overridden his usual fastidiousness. Midway through their protracted discussion, Alexander's phone buzzed with an urgent call from his chief financial officer. A major deal was facing an unexpected hurdle, requiring his immediate attention. He glanced at Chloe, then at his phone, a rare dilemma. Usually, corporate matters took absolute precedence. As the Bentley slowly, painstakingly navigated the treacherous path, a sudden commotion erupted further down the alley. A piercing, terrified cry cut through the mundane sounds of urban decay. Alexander's head snapped up, his initial annoyance giving way to a flicker of something akin to curiosity, though he would never admit it. Marcus slammed on the brakes, the powerful engine idling with a low growl. "I have an urgent matter that requires my attention," Alexander stated, a slight tightness in his jaw. "We will reconvene tomorrow. Consider the points we have discussed." Through the grime-streaked window, Alexander saw it, 3 hulking figures. Their faces obscured by the dim light and their own aggressive posturing, had cornered a small, elderly woman against a grimy brick wall. Her shopping bag lay spilled at her feet, its contents scattered like confetti. Her frail frame trembled visibly, and her voice, though choked with fear, pleaded softly. It was a scene straight out of a cheap crime drama, something so far removed from Alexander's reality that it felt almost surreal. Chloe simply nodded, her expression unperturbed. "Of course, Mr. Thorne. I look forward to your revised revisions." Her subtle emphasis on the last word, implying that the burden of adjustment lay with him, was not lost on Alexander. He felt a fresh wave of irritation, but it was now laced with a flicker of something almost amused. Alexander felt a familiar surge of indignation. Not sympathy, not truly, but a sense of affront. Such ugliness, such vulgarity, had no place disrupting his journey. He reached for his phone, prepared to summon his private security detail. A battalion of muscle that could materialize at his command within minutes. This was a situation for professionals, for those paid to deal with the unpleasantries of the world. He was Alexander Thorne. He did not engage with common thugs. The next day, the negotiation resumed, with Alexander making surprising concessions. Not out of weakness, he told himself, but out of a tactical adjustment. He still intended to influence the Haven, but he was learning that brute force would not work with Chloe Vance. He had to be more subtle, more patient, to find the cracks in her resolve, if they existed at all. Before he could even dial, A blur of motion at the alley's entrance caught his eye. A young woman, dressed in simple, practical athletic wear, stepped into the grimy tableau. Her dark hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and her posture was effortlessly upright, betraying a quiet strength. Chloe Vance. She had been heading home from her martial arts studio, the familiar shortcut through the alley, a part of her daily routine. The sound of distress, sharp and undeniable, had pulled her attention from the rhythmic beat of her running shoes. He agreed to remove the more overt control clauses, replacing them with vague statements of mutual collaboration and shared vision that, while still subject to his interpretation, gave Chloe more immediate autonomy. He even conceded on the branding issue, allowing the Haven to retain its independent identity, with Thorne Industries simply listed as a founding sponsor, in a more discreet manner. Her eyes, a piercing shade of hazel, instantly assessed the situation. The fear radiating from the elderly woman, the predatory snarls of the men, the glint of something metallic in one thug's hand. It painted a clear picture. Her jaw tightened imperceptibly. Violence was never her first choice, but injustice, pure and unadulterated, was an affront she would not tolerate. She did not hesitate, did not weigh the risks, did not consider the social standing of anyone involved. Her moral compass, forged in years of disciplined training and unwavering belief in fairness, pointed true. Chloe, surprisingly, did not gloat. She reviewed the new document with the same meticulous attention, her eyes calm, her posture relaxed. When she finally signed it, her signature was firm and clear. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, offering him a small, polite smile. "I believe this is a partnership we can both be proud of." "Leave her alone." Chloe's voice, though calm, cut through the alley's oppressive atmosphere like a honed blade. It wasn't a question, nor a plea, but a statement of undeniable intent. Alexander felt a strange sense of victory. Even though he had given far more ground than he initially intended, he had secured a foothold, however small, in her world. As she prepared to leave, he found himself prolonging the conversation, asking about the Haven's current projects, about her own martial arts background. He was no longer just observing. He was genuinely curious, drawn into the world of this woman who had so fundamentally challenged his own, the largest of the thugs, a man whose bulk suggested more brawn than brain, sneered, turning his attention from the trembling woman to Chloe. "What's it to you, little lady? This ain't your business. Run along before you get hurt." His words were laced with crude menace, his eyes dismissing her as a minor inconvenience. Another easy target. Chloe answered his questions politely, but briefly. She maintained a professional distance, never revealing too much, never allowing him to penetrate the quiet strength that surrounded her. She was friendly, but not familiar, respectful, but not reverent. She treated him like any other potential donor, albeit one who required significantly more negotiation. It was a subtle, yet powerful assertion of her independence. Chloe took a single and deliberate step forward, her weight shifting subtly. Alexander, watching from the confines of his Bentley, felt a strange jolt. There was something in her eyes, a focused intensity that defied her unassuming appearance. He found himself momentarily forgetting his phone, mesmerized by the unfolding spectacle. As she finally walked out of his office, leaving behind the faint scent of something earthy and clean, Alexander found himself alone once more. He looked down at the signed contract, a physical manifestation of his reluctant concession. He had not won, not entirely, but neither had he lost. He had encountered a force unlike any he had ever known, a woman who possessed a strength that transcended mere physical prowess or financial might. Chloe Vance was not just a righteous girl who had beaten him up. She was a formidable opponent in a different kind of game, a game of values and wills. And for the first time in a very long time, Alexander Thorne felt a thrill that had nothing to do with market dominance and everything to do with the enigmatic woman who had dared to stand her ground against him. The game of professional domination had begun, and he realized with a jolt that he was not the only one playing to win. "It became my business the moment you laid hands on an innocent," Chloe replied, her voice still quiet, yet imbued with an unshakable resolve. She was not shouting, not screaming, not performing for an audience. She was simply stating a fact, a line that had been crossed, The signed partnership agreement between Thorne Industries and The Haven ushered in a new, albeit uneasy, phase of interaction between Alexander Thorne and Chloe Vance. For Alexander, it was a subtle victory, a foot in the door to a world he was determined to understand, and perhaps subtly conquer. For Chloe, it was a carefully negotiated truce, allowing her access to much-needed resources while safeguarding the Haven's autonomy. The initial influx of funds brought renewed energy to the center. New equipment arrived, meticulously chosen by Chloe to align with their philosophy of practical, durable tools rather than flashy, unnecessary gadgets. Scholarships were established, enabling more children from disadvantaged backgrounds to join their programs. Their faces alight with hope and excitement. The thug scoffed, lunging forward with a clumsy swing, clearly underestimating her. He was met not with a whimper or a dodge, but with a swift, economical movement. Chloe sidestepped his wild punch, her body a fluid extension of her will. Her left hand shot out, deflecting his arm with surprising force, simultaneously creating an opening. Her right foot, a blur of motion, snapped upwards in a precise, powerful kick that connected with the thug's midsection. He gasped, a guttural sound, his bulk momentarily suspended before he folded in on himself, collapsing to the ground with a sickening thud. Winded and stunned, Alexander found himself making more frequent, ostensibly casual, visits to the Haven. He would claim to be checking on the investment's progress or attending community outreach events that he himself had orchestrated. He observed Chloe with a keen, analytical eye. He watched her teach, her movements precise and graceful, her explanations clear and patient. He saw the genuine connections she forged with her students, the effortless way she commanded respect without resorting to authoritarianism. He noticed the tireless hours she put in, her quiet dedication extending far beyond the typical workday. He witnessed her humility when praised and her fierce protectiveness when a student faced a challenge. Each observation chipped away at his initial perception of her as merely a thug or a stubborn idealist, replacing it with a nuanced, increasingly complex understanding. The other two thugs, momentarily shocked by the sudden turn of events, exchanged wide-eyed glances. They had clearly not anticipated such a formidable response from a woman they had so easily dismissed. The second thug, emboldened by a desperate desire to restore their dominance, roared and charged, a rusty pipe clutched in his hand. This one was faster, more aggressive, but still lacked the refined precision of Chloe's movements. He even found himself engaging with some of the children, surprised by their unvarnished honesty and their simple joy. A particularly precocious 10-year-old, captivated by Alexander's imposing height, once asked him, "Are you a ninja, Mr. Thorne? You look like you could be a secret agent." Alexander, for the first time in memory, found himself smiling genuinely, a rare, unforced expression that softened the harsh lines of his face. He quickly caught himself, however, maintaining his usual aloof demeanor. But the moment lingered. Chloe met his charge head-on, her gaze unwavering. She didn't retreat. As the pipe swung down in a crude arc, she ducked underneath it, twisting her body with the grace of a dancer. Her hand snaked out, seizing the thug's wrist with an iron grip. A sharp, almost imperceptible twist, followed by a sudden pull, disarmed him, sending the pipe clattering against the alley wall. Before he could react, her knee drove upwards, finding a vulnerable spot, and he crumpled, cursing incoherently as he hit the ground. Despite the improved working relationship, Chloe remained vigilant. She trusted Alexander's generosity as far as she could throw it, knowing that a man of his ambition rarely acted without an ulterior motive. She meticulously reviewed all documentation, scrutinizing every report that came from Thorne Industries. Her intuition a finely tuned instrument for detecting irregularities. It was this ingrained caution that led her to stumble upon something deeply troubling. Only one remained. He was younger, perhaps less experienced, his bravado quickly fading into genuine fear. He looked from his fallen comrades to Chloe, then back to the formidable woman who stood before him, poised and unyielding. He considered running, but pride, foolish and misplaced, held him rooted. He lunged, a desperate, wild flurry of punches, aiming for anything he could connect with. One afternoon, while reviewing a quarterly financial report from Thorne Industries' philanthropy department, a standard procedure for all major partners, Chloe noticed a series of unusually large payments routed to a shell company listed as Apex Solutions. The payments were ostensibly for consulting services related to the community outreach program. However, Chloe's sharp eye caught two critical inconsistencies. Firstly, the consulting fees were exorbitant, far exceeding market rates for similar services. Secondly, and more concerning, the report stated that Apex Solutions was handling logistical support for international charity initiatives. Yet the Haven's partnership was explicitly local, city-based. It didn't add up. Chloe met his attack with a series of quick, defensive blocks, her arms moving like pistons. She allowed him to expend his energy, watching his movements, waiting for the precise moment. When it came, a brief opening as his guard dropped. She seized it. A quick, sharp strike to a pressure point on his neck, precise and controlled, sent a jolt through his system. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed, unconscious before he even hit the ground. Her integrity, a core pillar of her being, recoiled. She couldn't ignore it. She began to quietly investigate. She didn't have access to Thorne Industries' internal systems, but she possessed a different kind of resourcefulness. She spent hours researching Apex Solutions online, delving into public records, corporate registries, and obscure financial databases. What she found was a labyrinthine network of interconnected companies, many with vague descriptions and untraceable owners. Apex Solutions itself had a minimal online presence, no clear contact information, and a suspiciously recent incorporation date. It smelled of a money laundering scheme, or worse, a front for illicit activities. The alley fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of the elderly woman and the groans of the recovering thugs. Chloe stood over them, her chest rising and falling evenly, not a bead of sweat on her brow. She had dispatched them with clinical efficiency, her movements fluid and utterly devoid of wasted motion. Her attention immediately turned to the elderly woman, who was still huddled against the wall, clutching her chest, tears streaming down her wrinkled face. Chloe knew this was dangerous territory. This wasn't about a minor discrepancy, it was potentially about widespread corruption, possibly involving Thorne Industries at a very high level. Her mind, trained in strategic thinking and anticipating opponents' moves in a fight, began to piece together a puzzle far more complex than any martial arts technique. She recognized the hallmarks of a sophisticated operation, designed to funnel money through legitimate-looking channels. "Are you all right?" Chloe asked, her voice softening, her fierce composure giving way to genuine concern. She knelt, checking for injuries, her hands gentle as she helped the woman gather her spilled groceries. "They didn't hurt you." Her initial thought was to confront Alexander directly, but she quickly dismissed it. He was too intelligent, too cunning. A direct accusation without irrefutable proof would be easily deflected, and worse, it would tip her hand, making her a target. She needed to gather more evidence, to build an undeniable case. The woman, still trembling, managed a weak nod. No, thank you, child. You saved me." Her eyes, wide with disbelief and gratitude, fixed on Chloe. Seeing not a street brawler but a guardian angel, she discreetly reached out to a former student, a bright young woman named Maya, who is now interning at a small investigative journalism firm. Maya, eager to prove herself, was diligent and discreet. Chloe explained the situation in broad terms, focusing on the suspicious nature of Apex Solutions and the unusual payments, emphasizing the need for absolute confidentiality. Maya, with her burgeoning access to public databases and journalistic tools, began to dig deeper, following Chloe's leads. From the Bentley, Alexander had watched the entire spectacle unfold. His jaw had dropped, his initial annoyance replaced by a mixture of shock, grudging admiration, and a profound sense of disbelief. This woman, so unassuming, had single-handedly, effortlessly, dismantled 3 grown men. It was an astonishing display of skill, a raw, untamed power that deeply unsettled him. He was used to power, to wielding it, to seeing others bow before it. He was not used to seeing it wielded with such righteous fury, and certainly not by someone who looked like she belonged in a yoga studio, not a street brawl. As Chloe delved deeper into the shadowy world of corporate shell companies, Alexander, on his end, found his fascination with her growing in unexpected ways. The more time he spent at the Haven, the more he witnessed her unwavering dedication, her genuine kindness, and her uncompromising moral clarity. the more his own carefully constructed facade of cynicism began to crack. He had always believed that everyone had a price, that every ideal could be bent or broken with enough leverage. Chloe Vance was proving him wrong, fundamentally challenging his worldview. As Chloe helped the elderly woman, Alexander felt a strange impulse. The situation was resolved, yet something compelled him to step out of the car. Perhaps it was his inherent need to be in control, to take charge, even in a situation he had no part in creating. Or perhaps it was a subconscious desire to assert his dominance over this woman who had so thoroughly disrupted his preconceived notions. He pushed open the heavy car door, stepping onto the grimy cobblestones, his expensive suit looking comically out of place in the squalor. He started to notice the stark contrast between Chloe's integrity and the moral compromises he routinely made in his own business dealings. The ruthlessness that had propelled him to the pinnacle of power suddenly felt hollow, even distasteful, in the face of her authentic purpose. He found himself lingering after meetings, observing her interactions, seeking her candid opinions on matters that extended beyond the Haven, topics about urban development, social equity, even personal philosophy. He was testing her, unconsciously seeking to understand the source of her unshakable conviction. And each time, she responded with the same quiet strength, offering perspectives that were refreshingly honest and devoid of sycophancy. Well, Alexander began, his voice accustomed to holding immediate attention. That was quite the exhibition. You handled that rather efficiently. Perhaps you should consider a career in security. Or perhaps I could offer you something more. He trailed off, his eyes sweeping over her, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. He was about to offer her a job, to bring her into his orbit, to reassert the natural order where he was the benefactor and she, the grateful recipient. He was Alexander Thorne, and women listened to him. They obeyed him. It was during one such visit, a casual walkthrough of the newly renovated training area, that Alexander made an offhand comment that, unbeknownst to him, served as a crucial piece of Chloe's growing puzzle. We're expanding our global reach, he mused, looking out at the city skyline, working with a new subsidiary, Global Nexus. They're handling all our international logistics and optimizing our philanthropic investments overseas. The casualness of his tone belied the significance of the information. Global Nexus was a name Chloe had seen mentioned in the Apex Solutions corporate filings, a direct link she had been struggling to establish. Chloe, still focused on the elderly woman, heard the condescending tone, the underlying arrogance in his voice. She looked up, her hazel eyes meeting Alexander's. She saw the expensive suit, the perfectly coiffed hair, the air of entitled superiority that radiated from him like a palpable aura. Her gaze swept past him to the gleaming Bentley, realizing he had been watching the entire time, yet had done nothing. Her concern for the elderly woman was replaced by a sharp, righteous anger. This man, observing from his cocoon of luxury, now dared to patronize her, to offer her a career in what she was already mastering, simply because he deemed it worthy of his attention. Chloe's mind clicked. Global Nexus. Apex Solutions. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a picture of a larger, more intricate web. She kept her expression neutral, merely nodding in polite acknowledgement. That sounds like a significant undertaking, Mr. Thorne. Her focus, sharpened by the adrenaline of the fight and the lingering indignation, misread his movement. Alexander took a step towards her, perhaps to extend a hand, or to gesture towards his car, to finalize his proposition. To Chloe, still on high alert in a potentially dangerous environment, his sudden, direct approach felt like a challenge, another threat emerging from the shadows. His air of command, usually so effective, was perceived by her as aggressive posturing, an attempt to assert authority in a situation where he had earned none. Alexander, oblivious to the wheels turning in her mind, continued. Indeed, one must always look for efficiency, Ms. Vance, even in benevolence. Sometimes the most effective solutions are the least obvious. He gave her a small, knowing smile, believing he was sharing a business secret, unaware that he had just provided a vital clue for his own potential undoing. Without a flicker of hesitation, her trained body reacted. It was a fluid, instinctive response, born of countless hours of drilling and the primal need for self-preservation. Her left arm snapped up, blocking his perceived advance. Her right hand, a compact, powerful fist, shot out. It wasn't a wild swing, but a precise, controlled strike, honed to deliver maximum impact with minimal effort. It connected with Alexander's jaw, a sharp, resounding crack that echoed in the confined space of the alley. The force of the blow was unexpected, brutal in its efficiency. Alexander's head snapped back, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated shock. A gasp, more of disbelief than pain, escaped his lips as he stumbled backward, losing his footing on the uneven cobblestones. As Chloe continued her investigation with Maya, the complexity of the financial web began to reveal itself. Apex Solutions was not just a shell company. It was a key node in a larger scheme involving several other shadowy entities, all funneling money through a legitimate-looking facade. The funds were being siphoned from various Thorn Industries projects, including some of their larger infrastructure developments, and disguised as legitimate expenses. The international charity initiatives were a smokescreen for illegal offshore accounts and potentially even darker activities. The scale of it was staggering, reaching far beyond a simple tax evasion scheme. He fell, not gracefully, but with a clumsy, undignified sprawl, landing squarely on his backside. The expensive fabric of his suit gathered uncomfortably, and a sharp pain lanced through his jaw. More than the physical impact, it was the sheer audacity, the complete disregard for his status, the utter disrespect that left him breathless. He, Alexander Thorn, had just been punched and knocked down by a woman. And not just any woman, but this unkempt, fierce, and utterly unyielding one, who had just delivered the most shocking and humiliating blow to his ego he had ever experienced. The more evidence Chloe and Maya uncovered, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about a rogue employee or a minor partner. The sheer complexity and widespread nature of the scheme suggested involvement at a very senior level, possibly even implicating Alexander himself. This thought sent a chill down Chloe's spine. She had seen the arrogant CEO, the charming benefactor, and now, potentially, the orchestrator of a massive corruption network. The realization was sobering, pushing her to the limits of her ethical resolve. Could the man who had shown glimmers of genuine curiosity, even respect, be capable of such pervasive deceit? Chloe, instantly regretting her hasty action, saw him fall. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't just stand there and watch when others are in trouble, then try to lecture them afterward," she stated, her voice sharp with disdain. She had mistaken his gesture, yes, but his condescending tone had been unmistakable. She offered him no hand, no apology. Her gaze, cold and dismissive, lingered on his shocked face for a mere second longer, before she turned back to the elderly woman, completely disregarding the CEO sprawled on the ground. Chloe knew that this information was a ticking time bomb. Exposing it would not only jeopardize Thorn Industries, but also put her and the Haven at immense risk. The individuals involved in such a large-scale operation would undoubtedly be powerful, ruthless, and willing to go to great lengths to protect their secrets. She found herself weighing the personal danger against her unwavering commitment to justice. The thought of letting it go, of simply looking the other way, was abhorrent to her. Her moral compass, once again, pointed her in the direction of confrontation. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. "Let's get you out of here," Chloe said to the still-shaken woman, helping her to her feet and guiding her quickly towards the alley's exit, leaving Alexander Thorn, stunned and humiliated, to grapple with the dusty cobblestones and his shattered pride. The roar of the Bentley's engine as Marcus, finally overcoming his own shock, began to stir, seemed to mock Alexander's sudden helplessness. He felt a throbbing ache in his jaw, but the more profound pain resonated in his mind, the image of her defiant eyes, the shock of her fist, and the undeniable fact that a woman had not only defied him, but had physically subdued him, treating him no better than the thugs she had just dispatched. His perfectly ordered world had just been irrevocably, dramatically, and embarrassingly upended. She began working late into the nights, poring over documents, cross-referencing names, and building a comprehensive timeline of suspicious transactions. Maya, initially excited by the journalistic scoop, grew increasingly nervous as the true scope of the corruption became apparent. "Chloe," Maya whispered during a hushed phone call, her voice strained. "This is bigger than we thought. Much bigger. Are you sure you want to go through with this? These are dangerous people, The pristine silence of Alexander Thorne's executive office, perched high above the city's bustling streets, was usually a balm to his meticulously ordered mind, but today, it felt oppressive, a vast, echoing chamber for his humiliation. He sat behind his imposing desk, a behemoth of polished granite and dark wood, his hand occasionally reaching up to touch his jaw, which still throbbed with a dull ache. The physical pain was negligible. The wound to his pride, however, was a gaping chasm. He, Alexander Thorne, a man who commanded industries and bent entire markets to his will, had been summarily dismissed and then physically assaulted by an unknown woman in a grimy alley. The memory of her unflinching eyes, her swift, precise strike, and her utterly dismissive turn of the back burned in his mind like a branding iron. Chloe looked out her window at the city lights, her jaw set. Doing nothing is not an option. Maya, not when innocent people are being exploited. When funds meant for good are being siphoned off for ill-gotten gains. We have to expose it, but we have to be smart about it. We have to make sure our evidence is irrefutable. She was no longer just a martial arts instructor. She was a detective, a guardian, driven by an unyielding sense of right. The quiet strength Alexander had observed in her was now hardening into an unshakable resolve, preparing for a battle far more intricate and perilous than any physical confrontation. He had made it to the board meeting, albeit late, his jaw stiff, his composure strained. The minor bruise forming on his chin was easily explained away as a minor car incident, a convenient fabrication. But the internal turmoil was harder to conceal. He found his focus wavering, his usual razor-sharp intellect dulled by an incessant loop of the alley encounter. Every decision, every calculation, was interrupted by the phantom echo of her righteous fist. Unbeknownst to Chloe, her quiet inquiries had begun to raise faint alarms within the labyrinthine network of Thorne Industries. The unusual access she had gained through the partnership, combined with her meticulous scrutiny of financial documents, had caught the attention of those who guarded the company's darker secrets. A senior executive, a man named Victor Harding, who oversaw a number of Thorne Industries' more opaque subsidiaries and special projects, received a discreet report from his internal monitoring team. The report flagged Chloe Vance as an unusually inquisitive partner who was asking too many detailed questions about peripheral financial structures. Harding, a man whose loyalty to Alexander was unwavering, but whose methods were far less scrupulous, felt a cold knot of apprehension. He did not know the full extent of her findings, but he knew enough to realize that her integrity posed a direct threat to the delicate balance of power and profit he had so carefully maintained. He began to watch her, subtly at first, then with increasing intensity, preparing to neutralize the threat she unknowingly represented. The whispers of corruption were growing louder, and Chloe Vance, the righteous girl, was about to find herself caught in the crosshairs of a ruthless, unseen war. His usual disdain for trivial matters had been replaced by an obsessive need to understand. Who was she? How dared she? And more disturbingly, why did the memory of her defiant stance evoke not just fury, but a strange, unsettling flicker of fascination? It was an anomaly in his perfectly structured universe, a rogue element that threatened to destabilize his carefully cultivated sense of superiority. The stark reality of the corruption scheme, meticulously pieced together by Chloe and Maya, hung heavy in the air between them. The initial thrill of discovery had given way to a chilling apprehension. This was not a simple act of fraud. It was a vast, systemic embezzlement designed to exploit loopholes and hide illicit gains behind a facade of legitimate corporate activity. The names and entities they had unearthed, Apex Solutions, Global Nexus, and a shadowy constellation of other shell corporations, painted a clear picture of a sophisticated criminal enterprise, operating with impunity, likely under the very nose, or perhaps with the direct involvement, of the highest echelons of Thorne Industries. The sheer scale of it, the cold calculation, was deeply disturbing to Chloe's righteous sensibilities. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his reverie. Marcus, his head of security, entered, his usual stoic demeanor showing a hint of strained patience. Marcus had witnessed the entire debacle from the driver's seat, and while he hadn't dared to comment, Alexander knew the incident had registered deeply. Marcus was a man who understood power dynamics, and what he had seen was an unprecedented disruption of Alexander's, Maya, seated across from Chloe in a quiet corner of a university library, her usually vibrant face pale, pushed a thick stack of printouts across the table. This is everything. Chloe. Bank transfers, property records, corporate filings for all the subsidiaries. It's all here. It shows millions, perhaps tens of millions, being funneled away from legitimate projects, including some of Thorne Industries' own charitable initiatives. The funds are then routed through these shell companies and disappear into offshore accounts. Her voice was barely a whisper, laced with a fear that resonated with Chloe's own growing unease. And the more I dig, the more I see Victor Harding's name. He's listed as a director or signatory on almost all of these shell companies. He seems to be the linchpin. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Marcus asked, his voice even. Though his eyes betrayed a subtle inquiry, Chloe's jaw tightened. Victor Harding. She had seen him at Thorne Industries headquarters during some of her visits, a man with a perpetually slicked-back hairstyle and an unctuous smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was always hovering around Alexander, a shadow of the CEO, seeming to anticipate Alexander's every need. The idea that such a seemingly obsequious figure could be at the heart of such a brazen scheme was both sickening and unsurprising. The most dangerous snakes often wore the most polished scales. Alexander leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his gaze fixed on the panoramic view of the city. "Marcus, I require information, detailed information, on the woman from the alley." His voice was low, laced with an intensity that brooked no argument. "And Alexander Thorne?" Chloe asked, her voice low. "Is there anything that directly links him?" Marcus remained impassive. "Her name is Chloe Vance, sir, 28 years old, lives in the city's old district, not far from where the incident occurred. Works as a martial arts instructor at a community center called The Haven. Teaches various disciplines, predominantly taekwondo and capoeira, to children and young adults. She also volunteers at several local charities, focusing on youth empowerment and anti-gang initiatives. No criminal record, no outstanding debts, no known affiliations with any undesirable elements. A clean slate by all accounts." Maya shook her head, her eyes troubled. "Not directly. No signature, no direct transfer from his personal accounts. It's all incredibly well insulated. The trail goes cold just before it reaches him, but it's hard to imagine something of this magnitude happening without at least his knowledge, if not his active participation. Harding is his right-hand man for these special projects." Maya leaned forward, her gaze intense. "Chloe, we can't just hand this over to the police. These people are powerful. They'll bury it, or worse, they'll bury us. We need a strategy. We need to make this public in a way they can't suppress." Alexander's eyebrows arched slightly. A martial arts instructor. It explained the surprising agility, the devastating precision, but a community center. Charity work. It painted a picture far removed from the cold, calculating world he inhabited. It spoke of a different kind of strength, one not measured in market shares or corporate acquisitions, but in something far more intrinsic. The Haven. He mused aloud, the name sounding foreign, almost quaint, on his tongue. "Interesting. Has she attempted to contact anyone regarding the incident?" Chloe nodded slowly, her mind already racing. Maya was right. A simple report to the authorities would be insufficient. The power and influence of Thorne Industries, and by extension, the individuals behind the scheme, were too vast. They needed to expose it in a way that would bypass the usual channels, that would ignite public outrage and force accountability. This required a strategic retreat, not from the fight itself, but from the conventional battlefield. It meant building unlikely alliances. "No, sir. As far as we can tell, she hasn't reported it to the police or anyone else. She simply went about her day." Marcus reported, a subtle inflection of mild surprise in his tone. Most people, after such an encounter, especially one involving a prominent figure like Alexander, would have sought some form of recourse or recognition. Chloe Vance seemed utterly unfazed. "We need a larger platform," Chloe stated, her voice regaining its usual resolute calm. "Someone with credibility, someone who can amplify this. Do you know any senior investigative journalists?" Maya. "Someone with a reputation for fearlessness and integrity." This information only deepened Alexander's fascination. Not only had she knocked him down, but she had done so without a flicker of concern for repercussions, as if he were just another obstacle in her path to justice. It was a level of self-assurance, a moral certitude, that he rarely encountered in his world of sycophants and opportunists. He was accustomed to being feared or revered, never to being completely dismissed. It was a novel, irritating, yet undeniably captivating experience. Maya thought for a moment, then her eyes lit up. There's Daniel Reed. He's a veteran investigative reporter at the Daily Herald. Known for breaking some of the biggest corporate corruption stories in the last decade, he's relentless. And he doesn't back down. But he's also incredibly selective. He won't touch a story unless the evidence is ironclad. Find out more about this Haven Center, Alexander commanded, his voice growing sharper. Their funding, their operations, their key personnel, everything. I want a comprehensive report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Then we make it ironclad, Chloe responded, her gaze hardening. We package everything, make it undeniable, and we go to Daniel Reed. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, a rare occurrence. Sir, with all due respect, is this truly a priority? We have several critical mergers pending, and the Asian market expansion is in a delicate phase. His concern was not for Alexander's pride, but for the empire, for the bottom line. He saw Alexander's obsession as a potential distraction, an emotional indulgence that could jeopardize their vast interests. Over the next few days, Chloe and Maya meticulously organized their findings. They created a comprehensive dossier, cross-referencing every transaction, every corporate filing, every piece of evidence they had managed to unearth. They built a clear, compelling narrative of financial malfeasance, carefully highlighting the paper trail that led from Thorne Industries' legitimate accounts to the shadowy offshore entities controlled by Victor Harding. It was a daunting task, requiring long nights fueled by coffee and an unwavering sense of purpose. Chloe's martial arts training had instilled in her a discipline for meticulous preparation, a patience for detail, and an understanding that victory often lay in the painstaking groundwork. This was her new battlefield, and data was her weapon. Alexander's gaze, cold and unyielding, snapped to Marcus. My priorities are mine to define. Marcus, and at this moment, this is a priority. Do you understand? Finally, armed with their meticulously compiled evidence, Chloe and Maya secured a meeting with Daniel Reed. He was a man in his late 50s, with weary but sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened intently as Chloe, calm and articulate, presented their findings, Maya nervously providing supporting documents. Reed flipped through the pages, his expression impassive, but Chloe could sense his growing interest, a subtle twitch in his jaw, a slight narrowing of his eyes. Marcus, recognizing the steel in Alexander's tone, knew further protest was futile. He simply nodded. Understood, sir. I'll have the report ready. He turned to leave, a flicker of something akin to worry in his eyes. He had seen Alexander obsessive before, but never over something so seemingly trivial, so entirely personal. It felt dangerous. This is significant, Daniel Reed finally said, his voice gravelly. He looked at Chloe, his gaze piercing. You understand the implications of this, Ms. Vance. You're talking about taking down one of the most powerful corporations in the city, possibly exposing a high-level executive. This isn't a game. They will fight back. They will come for you. Alone once more. Alexander leaned back, his eyes closing. He replayed the scene in his mind, dissecting every movement, every word. Her calm assertion, "It became my business the moment you laid hands on an innocent," her efficient takedown of the thugs, and then the unexpected punch, followed by her scathing rebuke, "Don't just stand there and watch when others are in trouble, then try to lecture them afterward." Her words, delivered with such righteous indignation, pricked at a long-dormant part of him. He had always seen himself as a problem solver, a mover and shaker, but her actions had exposed a profound passivity in his response to raw injustice. He had been a spectator in his luxury vehicle, while she had been the active agent of change. Chloe met his gaze without flinching. I understand, Mr. Reed, but some things are worth fighting for. The haven, the community, the principle of justice. We can't let them get away with this. The realization was unsettling. For Alexander Thorne, control was paramount. He controlled companies, markets, people, yet in that alley. He had been utterly out of control, reduced to a stunned heap on the ground, and the woman who had done it, Chloe Vance, was now an inescapable fixture in his thoughts. He needed to understand her, to categorize her, to ultimately regain the sense of control she had so effortlessly stripped away. Reed studied her for a long moment, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. He saw not just a brave woman, but a woman driven by an unshakable moral core, a rarity in his cynical world. "All right," he said, closing the dossier with a decisive thud. "I'll take this, but I'll need to verify every single detail. My team will be in touch. And from this moment on, you need to be extremely careful. Do not speak about this to anyone, not a soul." Meanwhile, in a brightly lit, slightly worn gymnasium a few districts away, Chloe Vance was concluding her afternoon class. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and determination. A dozen young students, ranging from energetic 5-year-olds to earnest teenagers, bowed respectfully as she dismissed them. Chloe, despite the day's earlier unexpected drama, felt a familiar sense of peace and purpose here. This was her world, a place where discipline, respect, and integrity were not just abstract concepts, but tangible principles practiced daily. As Chloe and Maya left Daniel Reed's office, a sense of grim determination settled over Chloe. The first, crucial step had been taken. The information was out of her hands, placed into the capable hands of someone who could truly wield it. But the battle was far from over. It had only just begun. She watched them leave, their faces flushed with exertion, a few exchanging playful punches that were more enthusiastic than accurate. She smiled faintly, guiding these young minds and bodies, instilling in them not just fighting techniques, but a strong moral foundation, was her life's calling. The memory of the alley incident, though still vivid, was already receding into the background. It was just another Tuesday, another instance of injustice that required a firm, decisive response. She had helped the elderly woman, ensured the thugs were incapacitated, and hopefully reported by someone else, and moved on. The well-dressed man she had accidentally punched, he was a fleeting detail. Another self-important individual who had stumbled into a situation he clearly didn't comprehend. She hadn't even given his appearance a second thought beyond noting his condescending tone. Meanwhile, back in the gleaming tower of Thorne Industries, Alexander Thorne found himself increasingly distracted by the enigmatic presence of Chloe Vance. The signed partnership agreement had opened a channel between their two worlds. A channel Alexander found himself surprisingly compelled to explore. He still saw her as a challenge, a fascinating puzzle to solve. But the initial arrogance was slowly being eroded by a burgeoning respect. Her fierce independence, her refusal to be corrupted, her unwavering dedication to something beyond material gain. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered. He found himself thinking about her at odd hours, replaying their negotiations, analyzing her calm defiance. She wasn't just a woman who had physically bested him. She was a woman who had intellectually outmaneuvered him, a fact that both infuriated and oddly stimulated his highly competitive nature. As she began tidying up the mats, another instructor, a kind-faced woman named Elena, approached her. "Rough day. Chloe, I heard some commotion in the old district this morning. Everything all right?" His usual associates, the sycophantic executives who populated his inner circle, seemed dull and predictable in comparison. Their constant praise and eager compliance felt hollow. He began to perceive their motivations with a new, critical eye, a subtle shift in perspective unconsciously influenced by Chloe's uncompromising moral clarity. He started to notice small inconsistencies in reports, minor exaggerations in project budgets, a subtle lack of transparency in certain dealings. These were things he had previously dismissed as the inevitable friction of a vast corporate machine, or even clever business practices. Now, they felt off. He began to scrutinize his own empire with the same analytical gaze he had previously reserved for the competition. Chloe shrugged, a slight smirk playing on her lips. Just another day. Some petty thugs. An elderly lady in distress. Nothing I couldn't handle. She omitted the detail about the CEO. It felt irrelevant, a bizarre footnote to an otherwise ordinary act of intervention. His attention particularly fell on Victor Harding. Harding, Alexander's long-standing head of special projects and a key architect of many of Thorne Industries' more aggressive expansion strategies, had always been loyal, efficient, and discreet. Yet, Alexander found himself recalling the subtle evasiveness in Harding's answers when questioned about certain international projects, the overly enthusiastic reports on philanthropic optimization through Global Nexus. It was a gut feeling, a nascent seed of suspicion planted by Chloe's relentless honesty. That began to take root in his mind. He started to pull back on some of Harding's autonomy, requesting more detailed breakdowns, more frequent updates, all under the guise of streamlining operations. He was probing, subtly, cautiously, unaware that his instincts, honed by decades of business acumen, were now being guided by an entirely different compass, one that pointed towards the righteousness Chloe embodied. "You're too modest," Elena chuckled. "You always make it sound so simple. These streets aren't for the faint of heart. Good thing we have you looking out for people." Victor Harding, however, was no fool. He had built his shadow empire with meticulous care, relying on a vast network of connections and a keen understanding of corporate blind spots. He had sensed Alexander's shifting gaze, the subtle increase in scrutiny, the reports from his internal monitoring team, flagging Chloe Vance's unusual inquiries, had only confirmed his growing unease. He had expected her to be a nuisance, easily dismissed, but her persistent digging, her alliance with a journalist, indicated a far more serious threat. Harding knew that Alexander, despite his ruthlessness, had a perverse sense of corporate integrity. If the full extent of the scheme were to be exposed, even Alexander would not hesitate to sacrifice those involved to protect Thorne Industries' reputation and his own. Chloe simply smiled, accepting the compliment with quiet humility. She truly didn't see herself as a hero, just someone doing what needed to be done. Her life was simple, fulfilling. She found joy in the small victories, in seeing her students grow, in making a tangible difference in her community. The world of corporate power plays, of multi-million-dollar deals and board meetings, was a distant, alien concept, one she neither understood nor desired to be part of. Harding began to tighten his defenses. He instructed his operatives to initiate countermeasures. Digital trails were scrubbed, backup shell companies were activated, and discreet pressure was applied to anyone who might be tempted to talk. He had contingency plans for everything, including the unexpected emergence of a righteous girl who refused to play by the rules. He would discredit her, isolate her, and if necessary, eliminate her as a threat. He viewed Chloe as an irrational variable, a destabilizing force that threatened his carefully constructed world of illicit profit. He underestimated her, just as Alexander had initially, but Harding's underestimation was far more sinister, far more dangerous. He was a man who operated in the shadows, and he would not hesitate to plunge anyone who threatened his operations into permanent darkness. Back in his office, Alexander Thorne gazed out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. He wasn't thinking of mergers or market shares. His mind was consumed by Chloe Vance, the contrast between her simple, principled life and his own complex, powerful existence was stark. He was used to women seeking his approval, his attention, his resources. He was used to their eyes softening, their voices deferring. Chloe Vance, with her righteous anger and her unyielding spirit, had defied every expectation, every preconceived notion he held. She had not sought his approval. She had dismissed his very presence. She had not deferred. She had struck. The humiliation lingered. Yes, but beneath it, a nascent seed had been planted. A profound curiosity, tinged with a grudging respect, and an undeniable, infuriating pull towards the woman who had dared to treat him like a common thug. It was an unfamiliar emotion, disorienting and yet strangely compelling. He would learn everything about her, and then he would find a way to make her understand the error of her ways, to bring her into his world, to demonstrate the true nature of power, or so he told himself. The echo of her fist still resonated, a constant reminder of the day his carefully constructed universe had been irrevocably, and quite literally, knocked off its axis. Chloe, despite her efforts to maintain a low profile, felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere around her. Small, unsettling incidents began to occur. Unidentified cars parked too long near the Haven, strange hang-up calls on her phone, a momentary glitch in her apartment's security system. She dismissed them initially as paranoia, but her instincts, honed by years of anticipating threats, told her otherwise. She increased her personal vigilance, varying her routes, sharpening her awareness of her surroundings. She knew she was being watched, being probed. The invisible war had begun, and she was already in the crosshairs. Yet, there was no fear, only a deepening resolve. She had chosen this path, and she would not waver. The resistance of Chloe Vance was no longer personal. It was systematic, challenging the very foundation of power Alexander Thorne had built. And in his growing suspicion of his own inner circle, Alexander was unknowingly inching closer to the truth, a truth that would shatter his world and force him to choose sides in a conflict he never anticipated. The comprehensive report on Chloe Vance and the Haven Community Center landed on Alexander Thorne's desk precisely at 8 a.m. the following morning, a testament to Marcus's efficiency and Alexander's unyielding demand. He devoured the pages, his eyes scanning for any detail, any anomaly that could explain the perplexing effect Chloe Vance had on him. The more he read, the more intrigued he became. Her life was a stark counterpoint to his own, one built on service and community, the other on acquisition and power. Yet, there was a shared bedrock of discipline, a relentless pursuit of excellence, albeit in vastly different arenas. The first tremor hit Thorne Industries like an unexpected earthquake. It began subtly, a series of seemingly innocuous inquiries from various regulatory bodies regarding specific international investments. Then came the whispers in the financial press, vague allusions to irregularities in the philanthropic arm of a major conglomerate. For anyone outside the inner circle, it was just background noise, easily dismissed as speculative chatter. But within the polished corridors of Thorne Industries, Alexander Thorne felt the distinct shift in the air, a premonition of disruption. He learned about her rigorous training regimen, her quiet dedication to her students, the palpable respect she commanded from the children she mentored. There were photographs, Chloe, mid-kick, a picture of dynamic grace, Chloe, patiently explaining a complex move to a wide-eyed child, Chloe, laughing with the elderly woman from the alley, her expression warm and genuine. This last image was particularly jarring. It contrasted sharply with the cold, unyielding gaze she had directed at him, and the swift, brutal efficiency of her fist. The disparity fueled his obsession. He needed to reconcile these two Chloes. He needed to understand the woman who had dared to humble him. Daniel Reed, the veteran investigative journalist, had not wasted any time. He and his team, spurred by Chloe's ironclad dossier, had been meticulously verifying every transaction, tracing every convoluted financial pathway. They worked in the shadows, their efforts unseen, until the precise moment to strike. Reed understood the power of a well-timed exposé, the kind that could unravel an empire faster than any legal brief. Alexander dismissed the idea of direct confrontation. He was not a brute. He was a strategist. He wouldn't storm her community center, demanding explanations. That would be beneath him, and it would likely only solidify her disdain. Instead, he would weave himself into her world, subtly, organically. He would orchestrate calculated coincidences, situations that would force her to interact with him on his terms, or at least on terms that allowed him to observe and influence. He would demonstrate his true power, not with a fist, but with the subtle machinations of his corporate empire. Chloe, meanwhile, continued her routine at the Haven, maintaining a facade of normalcy, yet beneath her composed exterior, a heightened sense of vigilance pulsed. The unsettling incidents, the strange cars, the hang-up calls had subsided, but she knew it was merely the calm before the storm. She had entrusted her meticulous findings to Reed, and now, the gambit was set. She waited, preparing herself for the inevitable fallout, steeling her resolve for the larger battle to come. His first move was insidious in its simplicity. Thorne Industries had an extensive philanthropic arm, a well-oiled machine designed to polish the company's public image while providing tax benefits. Alexander instructed his head of philanthropy, a genial but easily manipulated man named Mr. Davies, to initiate a community outreach program specifically targeting youth development in underserved urban areas. The initial target, of course, was the Haven. The true storm broke on a crisp Monday morning. The Daily Herald, known for its unflinching investigative journalism, published a searing exposé titled "The Thorne Shadow Billions Funneled Through Philanthropy's Veil." The article, meticulously detailed and backed by irrefutable evidence, laid bare the intricate web of shell companies, the exorbitant consulting fees paid to Apex Solutions and Global Nexus, and the systematic siphoning of funds from legitimate Thorn Industries projects into offshore accounts. Victor Harding's name was prominently featured, identified as the architect and primary signatory of these illicit operations. While Alexander Thorn was not directly implicated, the article raised damning questions about his knowledge and oversight, painting a picture of either shocking negligence or willful complicity. The philanthropic endeavors, once a gleaming symbol of Thorn Industries' corporate social responsibility, were now exposed as a cynical front for widespread corruption. Mr. Davies, Alexander had stated during their brief, one-sided meeting, his voice smooth as silk, I believe in investing in the future. The Haven Community Center appears to be doing commendable work. I want Thorn Industries to offer a substantial donation, equipment, perhaps even a mentorship program. You will personally oversee the initial outreach. The impact was immediate and devastating. The stock market reacted violently. Thorn Industries shares plummeting as investors scrambled to offload their holdings. News channels ran breaking stories, dissecting the scandal with breathless urgency. Regulatory bodies, previously cautious, now launched full-scale investigations, their initial inquiries transforming into aggressive probes. Shareholders demanded answers, their outrage fueled by both financial losses and a sense of betrayal. The carefully constructed image of Thorn Industries, a beacon of corporate integrity and innovation, shattered into a million pieces. Mr. Davies, accustomed to Alexander's sudden, seemingly arbitrary directives, nodded enthusiastically. An excellent initiative. Mr. Thorn building bridges. Indeed. I'll dispatch a team immediately. In his penthouse office, Alexander Thorn watched the unraveling of his empire with a cold, almost detached fury. He saw the headlines scroll across his multiple high-definition screens, heard the scathing condemnations from financial analysts and public figures, the sheer audacity of the attack, the precision with which his company's most vulnerable underbelly had been exposed, left him reeling. He had always been the one pulling the strings, orchestrating the narrative. Now, he was caught in a maelstrom of someone else's making. No, Alexander interrupted, his voice sharper. You will go, alone, and you will assess their needs personally. Report directly to me. His first instinct was to blame everyone but himself. He summoned his executive team, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Who is responsible for this catastrophic breach? How did this information leak? I want answers. And I want them now. Mr. Davies, slightly bewildered by the unusual level of personal involvement from the CEO, nonetheless complied. This was Alexander's subtle way of paving the path, of ensuring his influence touched Chloe's world without immediate detection. His executives, usually composed and efficient, were a picture of panicked disarray. Jeremy, his assistant, stammered, Sir, the source is anonymous. The Herald is claiming journalistic privilege. Our cybersecurity team is scrambling. But it's like they had everything. Every single transaction, every single shell company. Days later, Chloe found herself shaking hands with Mr. Davies, a man whose earnest demeanor seemed at odds with the imposing logo of Thorn Industries emblazoned on his pristine suit jacket. He spoke of corporate social responsibility, of fostering local talent, of a desire to give back to the community. Chloe listened, her expression polite but wary. She had seen too many corporations swoop in with grand gestures only to abandon projects once the publicity died down. She was a pragmatist, not easily swayed by empty promises. Alexander's gaze, sharp and piercing, swept across the room, finally settling on Victor Harding. Harding, usually so self-assured, was visibly pale, his slicked-back hair slightly disheveled. Victor, Alexander said, his voice deceptively calm. Explain yourself. Apex Solutions, Global Nexus. What is the meaning of this? Harding swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Sir, it's a misunderstanding. These were strategic investments, designed to optimize certain tax structures. There was no illicit intent. The Herald has simply misrepresented the data. His voice lacked its usual conviction, betraying the desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling edifice of lies. Alexander stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with brutal clarity. The subtle evasiveness, the overly enthusiastic reports on philanthropic optimization, the increasing scrutiny he had placed on Harding's operations. It all coalesced into a damning indictment. Chloe Vance's righteous honesty, her insistence on integrity, had subtly shifted his perception, making him receptive to the very truth he had previously dismissed. He saw the network Harding had built, the betrayal masked as loyalty, the personal enrichment at the expense of Thorne Industries' integrity. The rage that filled him was not just about the financial loss, but about the profound violation of trust, the fundamental disrespect for his carefully built empire. A misunderstanding. Alexander's voice was a barely audible whisper, yet it cut through the room like a razor. This is not a misunderstanding. Victor, this is treason. This is outright theft, under the guise of my company's name. You have used Thorne Industries as a shield for your personal larceny, and you have exposed us to utter ruin. He stood up, towering over Harding, his presence radiating pure, unadulterated fury. Marcus, get him out of my sight, immediately. And contact our legal team. I want every asset frozen, every account investigated. I want him stripped of everything. Marcus, silently efficient, moved to usher a trembling Harding out of the room. The other executives watched in stunned silence, a chilling realization dawning upon them. Alexander Thorne was not just angry, he was betrayed, and his retribution would be swift and merciless. As the chaos subsided, Alexander found himself alone once more, the relentless news cycle still blaring Harding's alleged crimes. His mind, usually so focused on external threats, now turned inward, seeking the source of this devastating exposé. Daniel Reed was a respected journalist, but he wouldn't pursue a story of this magnitude without a compelling source, someone with intimate knowledge and access to the inner workings of the company. A name, persistent and unavoidable, emerged in his thoughts: Chloe Vance. It was a chilling realization, yet it was also undeniably logical. Her initial resistance, her meticulous scrutiny of the partnership agreement, her unwavering moral compass, it all pointed to her. She'd been the only one who had dared to question him, to challenge his authority, to see beyond the polished facade. He recalled her piercing hazel eyes, her calm but firm rejection of his condescending offers, her quiet strength during their negotiations. She was the only one with the integrity and the intelligence to uncover such a scheme, and the sheer audacity to expose it. A strange mix of emotions churned within him, renewed fury at her direct opposition, but also a grudging, almost profound respect. She had not only outmaneuvered him intellectually during their contract negotiations, but she had now, with surgical precision, exposed a festering wound within his own company, a wound he had been blind to, or perhaps had willfully ignored. She hadn't played his game, she had played her own, and she was winning, comprehensively. He remembered her words in the alley: "Don't just stand there and watch when others are in trouble, then try to lecture them afterward." Her actions now were a direct embodiment of that principle. She wasn't just observing injustice, she was actively dismantling it, regardless of the personal cost. It was a level of courage and conviction he rarely saw, even in himself. He had spent his life accumulating power. Yet Chloe Vance, with seemingly nothing but her principles, wielded a different, more potent kind of influence. The immediate priority was damage control. Alexander activated his crisis management team, his legal department, and his most trusted financial advisors. He issued a public statement condemning Harding's actions, vowing full cooperation with the authorities and promising a comprehensive internal investigation. It was a classic corporate damage control playbook, but Alexander knew it was a desperate gamble. The public and the market would demand more than just words. They would demand accountability and a scapegoat. As the legal and public relations machinery whirred into action, Alexander found himself making a call he never expected to make. Not to his lawyers, not to his board, but to Marcus, his loyal head of security. "Marcus," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion, "I need to know everything about Chloe Vance's recent movements, her contacts, her schedule, discreetly. Leave no trace." He wasn't looking for revenge. Not anymore. He was looking for understanding, for the pieces of the puzzle that was Chloe Vance, and perhaps for a way to mitigate the damage, to salvage something from the wreckage, with the unlikely assistance of the woman who had brought his world crashing down. The city buzzed with the scandal, the name Thorne Industries synonymous with corruption. Chloe watched the news reports from the modest comfort of her living room, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. Her part was done. For now, Daniel Reed had delivered, and the wheels of justice, however slowly, had begun to turn. She felt a profound sense of relief, but also a nagging apprehension. She knew that exposure was only the first step. The true battle lay in ensuring that justice was fully served, that the powerful were held accountable, and that the system, once again, bent towards righteousness. She knew Alexander Thorne would be reeling. She imagined his fury, his disbelief, his desperate attempts to regain control, and she knew, with an intuitive certainty, that his attention would inevitably turn to her. He was a predator, always seeking the source of the threat, but this time his focus would be different. It wouldn't be just anger, it would be a mixture of shock, confusion, and perhaps a grudging recognition of her formidable spirit. The initial blow to his pride had been physical, delivered in a grimy alley. The second, far more devastating blow was intellectual and moral, shaking the very foundations of his empire and his worldview. The game had escalated, and Chloe Vance, the righteous girl, was ready for the next move, knowing that her opponent, though wounded, was more dangerous than ever, but also, perhaps, beginning to understand her in a way no one else ever had. The aftermath of the Daily Herald's exposé was a vortex of chaos for Thorne Industries. Alexander Thorne, a man who had always navigated the choppy waters of the corporate world with an almost supernatural calm, found himself in the eye of a hurricane. The plummeting stock price, the barrage of regulatory investigations, the furious calls from shareholders. It was a concerted assault on his empire. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt a sliver of genuine vulnerability. Yet, beneath the professional crisis, a deeper, more personal conflict raged. The inescapable truth was that Chloe Vance, the righteous girl he had dismissed and then underestimated, was the architect of his current predicament. His initial fury towards Harding had quickly morphed into a cold, calculated rage directed at Chloe. She had dared to expose his vulnerability, to challenge his very authority, not with a physical blow this time, but with an intellectual and moral one that struck at the heart of his carefully constructed world. He saw her now not just as an adversary, but as a formidable opponent on a grand chessboard, a game where the stakes were his reputation, his legacy, and potentially his freedom. But a strange, unsettling admiration was inextricably woven into this anger. Her intelligence, her unwavering principles, her sheer audacity. It was genuinely captivating. A testament to a strength he had never believed existed outside his own realm of power. Alexander initiated his counter-gambit. He deployed his vast legal resources, not just to mitigate the damage caused by Harding's actions, but to discredit the source of the leak, to cast doubt on the integrity of Daniel Reed's reporting, and by extension, on Chloe. His public relations team worked tirelessly, attempting to spin the narrative, portraying Thorne Industries as the victim of a rogue executive and a sensationalist press. They highlighted the company's long history of philanthropic endeavors, including the recent partnership with The Haven, painting Alexander as a benevolent leader unfairly targeted. Discreetly, Alexander began to exert his influence. Calls were made, favors were subtly requested. He leveraged his extensive network, cultivated over decades of strategic alliances, to apply pressure. A minor investigative journalist who had attempted to follow up on Reed's story found his funding abruptly cut. A small community organization that had publicly supported The Haven suddenly had its major grant applications mysteriously denied. The message was clear: align with Thorne, or face the consequences. This was his preferred method of combat: invisible, insidious, and devastatingly effective. He arranged for a series of carefully crafted interviews, positioning himself as the wronged CEO, blindsided by a trusted subordinate. In one particular interview with a prominent financial news outlet, Alexander was asked about the allegations of corporate complicity. His response was carefully rehearsed, delivered with a grave sincerity that belied the fury churning within him. "We are deeply disturbed by Mr. Harding's alleged actions. Thorne Industries has always prided itself on integrity and transparency. We are cooperating fully with all investigations, and we will ensure that justice is served. As for the source of these allegations, it appears to be a disgruntled individual with an agenda, perhaps seeking personal gain or notoriety. We reserve the right to pursue all legal avenues against those who seek to damage our good name through baseless accusations." The veiled threat was unmistakable, aimed squarely at Chloe. Chloe, however, was not easily intimidated. She watched the news, saw Alexander's carefully curated performances, and felt a cold resolve harden within her. She knew his game. He was trying to isolate her, to turn public opinion against her, to make her out to be a malicious fabricator. But she had anticipated this. Her martial arts training had taught her that a direct, head-on assault was not always the most effective strategy against a larger, more powerful opponent. Sometimes you had to yield to gain leverage, to absorb the blow, and then use the opponent's own momentum against them. Daniel Reed and his team at the Daily Herald were Chloe's front line. They responded to Alexander's veiled threats and PR offensive with a steady drip feed of additional, damning evidence. New documents were released, showing deeper connections between Harding's shell companies and other high-ranking Thorne Industries executives, suggesting a more systemic corruption than Alexander had publicly acknowledged. They published an interview with a former Thorne Industries accountant who, inspired by the initial exposé, came forward with corroborating details about the illicit financial practices. The pressure on Thorne Industries, far from abating, intensified. Chloe, with Maya's help, also launched a quiet counter-campaign on the ground. She rallied community leaders, local activists, and the families of students at the Haven. She organized informal forums, not to discuss the corporate scandal directly, but to emphasize the importance of community integrity, transparency, and accountability from those in power. She shared anecdotes about how small acts of corruption could undermine vital social programs, subtly linking the abstract financial crimes to the tangible impact on real people's lives. She didn't mention Alexander Thorne's name directly, but the connection was clear, building a groundswell of public support that was far harder for Alexander's PR machine to combat. The chessboard stretched between them. Each move met with a calculated countermove. Alexander tried to bury the story. Reed brought new evidence to light. Alexander tried to discredit Chloe. Chloe strengthened her community ties, becoming an even more unassailable symbol of righteousness. The financial markets remained volatile, and the legal noose around Thorne Industries tightened. The pressure mounted, and Alexander found himself working round the clock, battling on multiple fronts. The cracks in Alexander's carefully constructed alliances began to show. Some of his long-standing board members, sensing the shifting tides and fearing for their own reputations, started to distance themselves. They had supported Alexander's ruthless tactics when they brought in massive profits, but widespread scandal was a different beast entirely. A few senior executives, seeing Harding's rapid downfall and fearing their own exposure, began to discreetly cooperate with the ongoing investigations, offering limited information in exchange for leniency. The loyalty Alexander had always commanded, built on fear and self-interest, began to erode under the relentless pressure of public scrutiny and impending legal action. One pivotal moment came during a tense board meeting. Alexander, his face gaunt from lack of sleep, presented a plan to consolidate assets and liquidate some less profitable divisions to shore up Thorne Industries' financial standing. He spoke with his usual commanding voice, but there was a subtle desperation in his eyes that had never been there before. One of the oldest board members, a man named Mr. Harrington, who had known Alexander for decades, finally spoke up, his voice heavy with disappointment. Alexander, with all due respect, these are merely bandages on a gaping wound. The public trust is shattered. Our reputation is in tatters. This isn't just about financial recovery, it's about moral accountability. We need to demonstrate a fundamental shift, not just a tactical retreat. Alexander stared at him, a muscle twitching in his jaw. He knew what Harrington was implying: a sacrifice, a public acknowledgement of fault. And that acknowledgement would, by extension, implicate Alexander himself. However, indirectly. He had always been the one dictating terms, not receiving ultimatums. Meanwhile, Victor Harding, now facing severe criminal charges and the very real possibility of a lengthy prison sentence, became a desperate wild card. From his holding cell, he sought to negotiate a plea deal, offering to implicate higher-ups in Thorne Industries in exchange for a lighter sentence. His lawyers began to leak carefully curated snippets of information to the press, hinting at a wider conspiracy and suggesting that Harding was merely a pawn in a larger game orchestrated by those at the very top. This put immense pressure on Alexander, forcing him to consider not just defending his company, but potentially defending himself against direct accusations. Chloe, from her vantage point, meticulously followed these developments. She understood that Harding's desperation was both a threat and an opportunity. A threat, because he might try to drag Alexander down, potentially implicating him in ways that were unfair or exaggerated. An opportunity, because his testimony could finally bring full justice to the pervasive corruption. She relied heavily on Daniel Reed's assessment of Harding's credibility and the veracity of his claims. Knowing that sensationalism could overshadow truth, Alexander, in a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative, decided to hold a televised press conference. His advisors urged caution, but Alexander was a man who believed in direct action, in confronting problems head-on. He intended to deliver a powerful, unequivocal statement, reaffirming his commitment to integrity and promising to root out all corruption within Thorne Industries. He would project an image of a strong, decisive leader, not a man in retreat. On the day of the press conference, the room was packed with reporters, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. Alexander stood at the podium, impeccably dressed, his posture rigid, radiating an aura of beleaguered authority. He began his statement, his voice resonating with practiced confidence, condemning Harding, reaffirming his dedication to transparency. He spoke of new internal audits, of stricter ethical guidelines, of a revitalized commitment to their philanthropic endeavors. Then a reporter, emboldened by the tense atmosphere, cut him off. "Mr. Thorne, can you confirm that Chloe Vance, the martial arts instructor from the Haven Community Center, was the primary source for the Daily Herald's exposé?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Alexander's eyes, previously fixed on a distant point, narrowed. He paused, a flicker of something unreadable, frustration, perhaps a perverse pride, crossing his face. He had intended to dismiss her as a disgruntled individual. But the directness of the question and the public's clear awareness of her role made evasion difficult. He weighed his options: deny, deflect, or confront. He chose a different path, one born of the grudging respect that had subtly grown within him. "Ms. Vance," Alexander said, his voice now devoid of its previous bluster, tinged with a complex mix of emotions, "is a woman of remarkable integrity. Her initial inquiries, stemming from a genuine concern for community welfare, brought certain irregularities to our attention. While the manner in which this information was subsequently disseminated is a matter for ongoing investigation, her actions undeniably highlighted a significant issue within our organization, an issue we are now addressing with the utmost seriousness." It was not an admission of guilt, nor an outright endorsement of her methods, but it was far from a condemnation. It was Alexander Thorne, acknowledging, for the first time in public, the unexpected, powerful impact of Chloe Vance. He was still trying to control the narrative, but a hint of truth, a sliver of grudging respect, had forced its way into his carefully crafted statement. The reporters buzzed, sensing the unexpected shift. Chloe, watching the live broadcast from the Haven, felt a chill. He hadn't condemned her. He had, in his own convoluted way, acknowledged her. It was a subtle, yet significant turning point in their unlikely game. Alexander Thorne was beginning to see her not as an annoyance or a mere opponent, but as a force to be reckoned with, a mirror reflecting the deeper truths he had long ignored. The chessboard was still active, but the players and their understanding of each other had fundamentally changed. The power he once wielded absolutely was now being questioned, not just by regulators and investors, but by the undeniable force of a single righteous woman and her unshakable moral code. The walls of his empire, already crumbling, now felt the tremors of a deeper reckoning, a confrontation not just with corruption, but with his own tarnished integrity. Alexander Thorne's reluctant acknowledgement of Chloe Vance during the press conference sent a ripple through the media landscape, a quiet admission from a man who rarely conceded anything. It didn't absolve him, but it shifted the narrative, adding a layer of complexity to the unfolding scandal. For Chloe, watching from the quiet dignity of the Haven, it was a moment of stark validation. He had been forced to speak her name, to acknowledge her role. However grudgingly, it was a small victory, but one that signaled a deeper change in the game. The truth, once confined to her careful dossier, was now a public spectacle, and the pressure on Thorne Industries became unbearable. The investigations escalated with relentless ferocity. Federal prosecutors, spurred by the damning evidence provided by Daniel Reed's journalistic endeavors and public outcry, issued subpoenas to a dozen high-ranking executives at Thorne Industries. The company's financial records were meticulously scrutinized, and auditors swarmed the corporate tower, turning over every stone. The world Alexander had so meticulously controlled was now unraveling at a breathtaking pace. Victor Harding, still in custody, became a pivotal, if desperate, player. Facing life imprisonment, his legal team initiated aggressive plea negotiations, offering to provide comprehensive testimony against the broader network of corruption in exchange for a reduced sentence. The information he held was explosive, detailing years of illicit dealings, kickbacks, and elaborate money laundering schemes that extended beyond Thorne Industries, implicating a powerful, shadowy consortium of international players. He had kept meticulous records, believing them to be his ultimate leverage, his insurance policy. Now, they were his only way out of a life behind bars. Daniel Reed received a discreet tip about Harding's willingness to cooperate. He immediately recognized the seismic potential of this development. A high-ranking executive turning state's evidence would be the final, undeniable nail in the coffin of the corruption ring. He contacted Chloe, his voice grave. Harding is talking. Chloe. He's offering up everything, but the prosecutors need ironclad proof, and his credibility is complicated. They're looking for an independent corroborating witness, someone with unimpeachable integrity, who can publicly support his claims, even if they're not directly involved in the inner workings. Chloe knew instantly what he was implying. She was that witness. Her meticulous documentation, combined with her public persona as a symbol of unwavering integrity, made her the ideal candidate. It was a dangerous proposition. Stepping into the spotlight, directly challenging the most powerful figures in the city, would put a target squarely on her back. But her moral compass, that unyielding guide that had led her from the alley to this moment, left her no choice. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady, resolute. "Tell them I'm ready." Alexander Thorne watched Harding's plea negotiations unfold on the news, a chilling dread settling in his gut. Harding's lawyers were skillfully leaking snippets of information, enough to create a firestorm of speculation, hinting at the vastness of the criminal enterprise. Alexander knew that if Harding implicated others, the integrity of his entire board, and by extension, his own perceived leadership, would be irrevocably tainted. He intensified his internal investigation, desperate to understand the full scope of Harding's betrayal, to preempt any further damage. He was a general in retreat, desperately trying to salvage what he could from a losing battle. His empire, once thought impenetrable, was crumbling. Key investors, sensing the prolonged legal battle and the profound reputational damage, began to divest. Major projects were put on hold. His most loyal executives, seeing the writing on the wall, discreetly updated their resumes. The sycophants disappeared. The air in the corporate tower, once thick with ambition and power, was now permeated by fear and uncertainty. Alexander, isolated and besieged, felt the profound loneliness of a king whose throne was being dismantled brick by agonizing brick. The crescendo arrived in the form of a televised congressional hearing, convened to address the widespread corporate corruption exposed by the Daily Herald. It was a public reckoning, a grand stage set for justice to unfold. The room was packed with lawmakers, media, and a tense public. Victor Harding, looking gaunt and defeated, was the star witness. He delivered his testimony, detailing with chilling precision the intricate web of deceit, the offshore accounts, the complicity of various individuals within Thorne Industries and beyond. He named names, cited dates, and produced digital records that corroborated every damning assertion. As Harding's testimony concluded, a hush fell over the room. Then the committee chair announced the next witness. "We would now like to call Ms. Chloe Vance, martial arts instructor and community leader, whose initial diligence brought these shocking revelations to light." A wave of murmurs swept through the room as Chloe, composed and determined, walked to the witness stand. She was dressed simply, eschewing the power suits of the other attendees, her posture radiating her usual quiet strength. She took the oath, her voice clear and unwavering. Alexander Thorne watched from a private viewing room, his eyes fixed on the screen. He saw Chloe, standing tall, radiating an aura of truth and conviction. He felt a profound, almost physical jolt. This was the same woman who had punched him in an alley, the same woman who had refused his overtures of control. Now, she stood on a national stage, poised to deliver the final blow to his already crumbling empire. He found himself not feeling just anger, but a strange, conflicted pride. She was doing what he, in his pursuit of power, had become incapable of standing unequivocally for what was right, regardless of the cost. Chloe began her testimony. She spoke not of complex financial jargon, but of the human cost of corruption. She recounted her initial suspicions, the meticulous research she and Maya had undertaken, the discovery of Apex Solutions and Global Nexus. She presented her own meticulously compiled documents, which, while not as extensive as Harding's, provided crucial independent corroboration for his claims. She spoke with a calm passion, her voice resonating with sincerity as she described how funds meant for community development and youth programs were siphoned away, depriving vulnerable populations. She spoke of the elderly woman in the alley, connecting the everyday injustices to the systemic corruption at the highest levels. "I am not an expert in corporate finance," Chloe stated, her voice steady, addressing the committee members. "I am simply someone who believes in fairness, in integrity, and in accountability. When I saw what was happening, I knew I could not stand by. These actions are not just financial crimes, they are a betrayal of public trust, a theft from the very communities these corporations claim to serve. My hope is that by bringing this truth to light, we can ensure that justice is served and that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." Her testimony, delivered with such clarity and moral authority, struck a chord. The narrative, previously focused on the dry financial details, suddenly gained a powerful human element. The media seized upon her words, hailing her as a courageous whistleblower, a symbol of righteous defiance against corporate greed. The public, weary of scandals, rallied behind her, demanding swift and decisive action. As Chloe concluded her testimony, a single decisive action took place outside the hearing room. Federal agents armed with arrest warrants issued based on Harding's testimony and Chloe's corroboration moved in, multiple high-ranking executives within Thorne Industries, those implicated by Harding's detailed confessions and the digital trails, were taken into custody. The news flashes across the bottom of the live broadcast, announcing the arrests in real time, sending a shockwave through the financial world and cementing the demise of the corrupt network. Alexander Thorne watched it all unfold, the screen reflecting the grim reality of his crumbling empire. He saw his trusted executives, men he had built an empire with, being led away in handcuffs. He saw the media frenzy, the triumphant faces of the prosecutors, the unwavering resolve of Chloe Vance. He felt a profound sense of loss, not just of wealth or power, but of the illusion of control he had always held. Harding had betrayed him, his own network had fractured, and the righteous girl he had underestimated had delivered the final, decisive blow. In that moment of ultimate defeat, as the cameras flashed and the cacophony of questions erupted around the arrests, Alexander found himself thinking, not of revenge, but of the alley, of the punch, of Chloe Vance's unyielding eyes. He had sought to dominate her, to bend her to his will. Instead, she had, with her unwavering integrity, broken his. He hadn't fallen for a woman obeying him. He had fallen, unexpectedly, for the righteous girl who had metaphorically, and literally, beaten him up as a thug. The irony was not lost on him. In his ruthless pursuit of power, he had lost sight of the very principles she embodied. And now, facing the profound consequences of that blindness, he felt a strange, bitter clarity. The battle was over. Justice, undeniable and uncompromising, had been served. The arrest of Thorne Industries' key executives sent shockwaves far beyond the corporate world, reverberating through financial markets, political circles, and the public consciousness. The dramatic conclusion of the congressional hearing, with Chloe Vance's compelling testimony and Victor Harding's damning confessions, painted a stark picture of unchecked power and systemic corruption. In the immediate aftermath, Alexander Thorne faced the full, unyielding force of justice, not as an omnipotent CEO, but as an individual grappling with the wreckage of his empire. The legal proceedings against the implicated executives moved swiftly, propelled by the irrefutable evidence and overwhelming public pressure. Victor Harding, his once slick demeanor replaced by gaunt desperation, testified extensively, providing granular detail about every illicit transaction, every complicit individual, and every scheme to defraud. His testimony, combined with Chloe's initial dossier and Daniel Reed's continued investigative reporting, ensured that justice was meted out without compromise. One by one, the powerful figures who had operated in the shadows, believing themselves untouchable, were brought to account, facing lengthy prison sentences and colossal financial penalties. Alexander Thorne, while not directly charged in the criminal conspiracy, faced a different, yet equally devastating reckoning. The public perception of him, once synonymous with ruthless success, shattered. Thorne Industries, stripped of its most influential executives and tainted by scandal, became a pariah. Its stock continued to plummet, major contracts were canceled, and its very existence hung by a thread. The board, in a desperate attempt to salvage what little remained of the company's reputation, demanded his resignation. It was a humiliating, yet inevitable, end to his reign. The man who had once commanded absolute obedience now faced universal condemnation and the bitter taste of defeat. He retreated to his penthouse, a gilded cage now devoid of its former grandeur. The silence, once a symbol of his exclusive power, now amplified the echoes of his failure. Marcus, his loyal head of security, remained by his side, a silent, stoic presence amidst the maelstrom. Alexander spent days poring over news reports, not with anger, but with a strange, almost analytical detachment. He saw the faces of the arrested executives, the familiar names now emblazoned with criminal charges. He saw the jubilant expressions of prosecutors and public advocates. And he saw Chloe Vance. The media hailed her as a hero, a modern-day David against a corporate Goliath. Her face, once unknown outside her community, was now synonymous with integrity and courage. News outlets interviewed her extensively, praising her unwavering moral compass and her refusal to back down in the face of immense power. The Haven, her beloved community center, became a symbol of hope and resilience, attracting new students and a groundswell of genuine support, far more impactful than any corporate sponsorship could have provided. Alexander observed her calm demeanor, her humble acceptance of praise, her unwavering focus on the community she served. He saw the genuine impact she had, not through wealth or intimidation, but through conviction and unwavering principle. It was a profound, uncomfortable realization. He had spent his life accumulating power, believing it to be the ultimate arbiter of success and influence. Yet, Chloe Vance, without any of his resources, had achieved a level of impact and respect that eluded him. Even at the peak of his empire, her power was authentic, earned through selfless action and unyielding truth. While his had been built on artifice and ambition, one quiet afternoon, weeks after his resignation and the sentencing of Harding and the other executives, Alexander found himself making a pilgrimage of sorts. He instructed Marcus to drive him to the old district, not in the opulent Bentley, but in a discreet, unmarked sedan. He walked the grimy alley where it had all begun, the site of his most profound humiliation and the genesis of his undoing. The broken cobblestones, the lingering scent of decay, it was all unchanged. A physical reminder of the day his carefully ordered world had been violently disrupted. He touched his jaw, a phantom ache lingering from her precise blow. The irony was palpable. The woman who had first physically humbled him was also the one who had morally dismantled his empire. He continued walking until he reached the Haven. He didn't enter. He simply stood across the street, observing. He saw Chloe, through the large windows of the gym, teaching a class of young children. Her movements were fluid, graceful, filled with a quiet joy. He watched her patiently correct a child's stance, saw the smile on her face as she encouraged a timid student. She was exactly where she belonged, doing exactly what she was meant to do. Unaffected by the chaos she had unleashed upon his world, he realized with a startling clarity that he was utterly irrelevant to her. Her pursuit of justice was not about him, not about revenge, but about a higher principle she held sacred. Alexander felt a profound emptiness, a void where his ambition and pride had once resided. He had lost everything that defined him, his company, his power, his reputation. But in that loss, a strange, nascent seed of something new began to sprout. He had been forced to confront the ugliness he had inadvertently fostered, the moral compromises he had made, the values he had neglected. Chloe Vance had not only exposed the corruption around him, but she had, in a devastatingly effective way, exposed the corruption within him. Her unyielding righteousness had become a mirror, reflecting his own profound flaws. Days later, Alexander received a subtle request from Daniel Reed. The journalist was working on a follow-up piece, delving into the systemic issues that allowed such corruption to flourish. He believed Alexander, from his unique vantage point, could offer valuable insights into the mechanisms of power and the temptations of unchecked authority. It was an opportunity for Alexander to speak, not as a defiant CEO, but as a humbled witness, to offer a different kind of testimony. He hesitated, then agrees. His interview with Daniel Reed was starkly different from his previous, carefully managed media appearances. He spoke with a quiet candor, shedding the layers of arrogance and self-preservation. He admitted to his complacency, his singular focus on power and profit, which had blinded him to the rot festering within his own organization. He didn't offer excuses, only stark admissions. He even acknowledged Chloe Vance directly, not as a disgruntled individual, but as the catalyst for a painful, yet necessary, reckoning. He spoke of her integrity, her unwavering moral compass, and how her actions had forced him to see the world, and himself, through a different lens. The interview was published, and it resonated deeply. It wasn't a redemption story. Not yet, but it was a beginning. It showed a sliver of humility, a nascent willingness to confront his own complicity, a fragile step towards accountability. The public reaction was mixed. Some remained unforgiving, others saw a glimmer of hope for genuine change. For Alexander, it was a release, a small but significant act of self-reconciliation. Months turned into a year. Thorne Industries, under new, more ethical leadership, slowly began the arduous process of rebuilding, a shadow of its former self, but with a renewed commitment to transparency. The community celebrated the successes of the Haven, which thrived under Chloe's continued leadership, a testament to the power of grassroots integrity. Chloe herself, while acknowledging the profound impact of the scandal, rarely spoke of Alexander Thorne directly. Her focus remained on her students, on empowering them with not just physical skills, but the moral strength to navigate a complex world. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the city, Chloe was locking up the Haven. As she stepped onto the street, she saw a lone figure standing by a lamppost, watching the building, Alexander Thorne. He was dressed simply, no longer in the bespoke suits that had once defined him. His posture was less rigid, the lines of his face softened by what appeared to be genuine contemplation. He looked different, subtly changed, as if the weight of his former life had been shed. He saw her, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them, once charged with conflict and control, was now quiet, tinged with a complex history. He took a hesitant step forward, then another. Chloe remained still, her gaze steady, devoid of anger, but equally devoid of warmth. She waited, letting him approach, allowing him to bridge the gap he had once so arrogantly widened. "Ms. Vance," Alexander said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it, stripped of its usual command. "Chloe," he corrected himself, a subtle acknowledgement of their shared, tumultuous past. He paused, searching for words. A rare vulnerability etched on his face. I came to thank you." Chloe raised an eyebrow, a hint of her usual skepticism returning. "Thank me for exposing your empire, for showing me what I'd become," he replied, his gaze meeting hers, unflinching. "For forcing me to see the truth, for demonstrating that true strength lies not in domination, but in integrity. You broke me, and in doing so, you saved me from myself. I lost everything that I thought defined me, but I found a clarity I never possessed." He looked away, his eyes sweeping across the modest building of the Haven, then back to her. "I have no right to ask for forgiveness, nor do I expect it. But I wanted you to know that I understand now, and I respect you, Chloe Vance, more than anyone I have ever known." Chloe looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing not the arrogant CEO who had once tried to control her, but a man humbled, perhaps even broken, by the consequences of his actions. She saw the genuine remorse in his eyes, the profound weight of his realization. She offered him no easy absolution, no comforting words. Justice had been served, and the path to redemption, for him, would be long and arduous, earned only through genuine change. but she acknowledged his sincerity. The Haven will continue its work, Mr. Thorne, Chloe stated, her voice calm, clear. We will continue to teach strength, discipline, and the importance of standing for what is right. Perhaps, in time, you will find your own way to contribute to such a world, not through power, but through purpose. She gave him a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of recognition, not reconciliation. Then she turned, walking away, leaving Alexander Thorne standing alone under the lamppost, a solitary figure in the fading light. He watched her go, her back straight, her stride purposeful, a beacon of unwavering righteousness. He had used to women obeying him, bending to his will, but he had unexpectedly fallen, in every conceivable way, for a righteous girl who had metaphorically and literally beaten him up as a thug, and in doing so, taught him the most profound lesson of his life. The future was uncertain for him, but for Chloe Vance, it was a new horizon, promising continued purpose, unwavering integrity, and the enduring power of a fierce, just heart.